Tell us, who are you wearing?
Who I'm wearing? This is Santa by Gucci.
Elf
by Louis V.
Santa and his elves paid a visit to the XL Energy Center this weekend. They brought some gifts, including Ryan Hartman, NHL records, and, hey, a little wild 5-game win streak. Let's go. Ryan Reeves is a little less intimidating when he's dressed as Santa and Kaprizov as an elf, but hey, he brought some gifts. It was nice to see. What'd you think of that? It's kind of good culture when you're winning, right?
Oh my goodness. I mean, everybody's got a smile on their face. 'Tis the season to be merry for sure, Cole. Minnesota Wild, 5-game home winning streak, albeit not against like maybe top-notch teams, but nobody's going to remember those in May or June, hopefully late in the playoffs. And also 11 wins and 3 losses in their last 14 wins. So Santa, starring Ryan Reeves, and the Elf, starring numbers 97, Kirill Kaprizov, really captured the spirit of this hockey team right now, and rightfully so.
Yeah, for sure. And what you know a lot of guys with the Wild. What have you been hearing about their culture? It seems like if they're coming in dressed as Santa and elves, that they've got a good thing going. Hopefully we can keep that rolling.
No doubt about it. And you've heard me talk long and hard about how important culture is to this coaching staff and its general manager, Bill Guerin. It just doesn't start at Christmas. They do, team bonding things. They do team trips before training camp starts. This year they went to Des Moines. Last year they went to the North Shore. And it's very important. I don't know, maybe any team, but hockey especially pays a lot of attention to culture. And when you see things like happening, and good on the Wild for being transparent too. I mean, those are things, I guess social media has changed that, but those are opportunities that are largely kept behind closed doors. So opening up the behind the scenes, like Kirill and Ryan in their Santa outfits, and it even extended beyond the locker room scene there and the dressing room scene that I've seen social media now of Kirill and Reeves showing up in holiday outfits for their pregame skate, tossing out holiday gifts to kids over the glass, and hey, it's let the good times roll right now. Again, we've talked about the streak that they're on. The coaching staff thinks they're playing way better systems hockey, and the wins and losses are a direct product of that.
Yep. The team's on a roll. It's hard to not have. It helps culture, I should say, when you're winning, right? And they're 18-11-2 now. They've got 31 points, just 6 behind Dallas, 3 behind the Jets. It's kind of a good place to be. They're ahead of Colorado. I kind of thought Colorado would be a little higher up at this point, but yeah.
Yeah, well, like the Wild, to the Avs point, like the Wild, they are now getting healthier too. McKinnon's been out of the lineup. They got a top gun out of the lineup, and they've just been kind of slogging through, but they're getting healthier now. And keeping Colorado in the rearview mirror is a luxury at Christmas time. But everyone's going to be healthier after Christmas. Everyone's going to be gunning. And you take a look at the teams ahead of them. Dallas is certainly formidable. And the Winnipeg Jets, whom the Wild will play on this when they come home after Christmas, after this 2-game West Coast road trip, will be already a huge game if they're within striking distance to leapfrog them. But back to the culture thing, I think hockey is really good about this. The camaraderie and the culture. Culture becomes character when things go, are tougher on the team. We've seen the Wild rebound from a slow start, but the character was revealed when they hung in there and they righted ships and got healthier and started playing Minnesota Wild hockey. And the culture thing, though, is the underwriting thing of it all. If you got, what is in agriculture? They say happy cows are healthy cows.
Right.
Good cultured hockey clubs are winning hockey clubs, and right now the culture is A+++.
Yeah. And it definitely helps to have the health scale starting to slowly lean in our favor. We got Ryan Hartman back this week. What have you been hearing about Duhaime? Is he next? And are we going to have a full roster? And what are they going to do when he comes back? What's kind of the move? You got a traffic jam. We talked about it many times.
You should be in the war room right now with Billy G, Cole, because he's asking himself those very same questions. As much as you want to go day to day, you have to figure out who's coming back when and and who and how that's going to affect. Ryan Hartman is back. He blew out a shoulder in late October in a fight of all reasons, and already you're seeing the residual effects. He's playing with Matt Boldy and Freddie Goudreau right now. He's playing a better brand of hockey. Matt Boldy is, just because Ryan Hartman is back, and Ryan Hartman is only going to get better and better as he gets back in the swing of things. As who that bumps and who that displaces, Duhaime going to be back that first week in January. That much I'm being told. And when that happens, you look even lower down in the lines. Obviously, you're not going to mess with the grief line, but you're looking at guys like Mason Shaw. You're looking at guys like Connor Dewar. You're looking at guys like Ryan Reeves. What happens when Duhaime is back? It's a pretty good problem to have. It's a luxury to have a player waiting in the wings, because no matter what game night, no matter what line, somebody is going to play subpar hockey enough to mitigate and probably dictate a personnel change. So it's a good problem to have right now. And if you think about Sammy Walker coming up right here basically over Christmas and making an energized start, that's a great problem to have. Who can I play and where, when, because I'm comfortable with whoever I'm going to be replacing with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no doubt. And one guy they will definitely not be replacing is Mr. Kirill Kaprizov. My goodness, he just continues to impress. He is getting better and better every game I watch. It feels like he actually just became the 4th fastest player to 200 points in the NHL since 2000. The only players above him, there are 3 players that have gotten there faster. I would love to have you guess. Who do you think are the 3 players that were faster to 200 points than Kaprizov?
Well, I know because I cheated, and now I'm just because I'm old. But I know Sidney Crosby's one, and I know that his teammate out there, the big Russian kid whose name eludes me right now, is
talking
another.
Cale Maker?
No, Cale Makar.
Malkin.
Evgeny Malkin. Sorry.
Yes, Malkin. I forgot. Yep.
Another Russian to Kirill. Is Makar in that group? I didn't see that one.
So he did it in 195 games, but Kaprizov did it in 167. So he's up there too. Yep. And Ovechkin is the other guy ahead of him. But shockingly, McDavid, Kaprizov is ahead of McDavid, and that surprised me. Same with Matthews. It took 204 games. So there needs to be a lot more talk out there about how good Kaprizov really is, I feel like.
Funny that three of the four with Malkin and Ovechkin and now Kaprizov and then Crosby being the 4th, 3 of the 4 are Russians. So that tells you something about, the Russian, skill set. But nevertheless, it's elite company. And, Kirill, to your point, Kirill Kaprizov, he's not only scoring goals, he's setting up just highlight goals and making passes on the fly to guys like Jared Spurgeon the other night, which turned out to be a huge goal against the Ottawa Senators.
Yes.
And I mean, the question isn't what can he do? The question is what can't Kirill Kaprizov do? And so far, that side of the column has got a big old goose egg on it.
Yeah, and a lot like any other sport, it's about who are the guys you can put around somebody like that. So let's kind of talk about that first line. They have been looking hot. They are on fire. Zuccarello, Kaprizov to Sammy Steele. I assume we see that stay the same. Would you agree, or have you heard anything different?
Yeah, well, you've been around sports long enough. You don't fix what's not broke. I think the key to the 3 you just brought up there, and by the way, Zuccarello gets a hat trick the other night. I haven't heard of a hat trick from him in a long time, but that's just the unselfishness and the role this first line is on. I think when you mention Kaprizov and Zuccarello on the wings, the person that's most important to that is a guy like Sammy Steele. The Wild have finally felt like they've landed a centerman that's good enough on draws, that's good enough in the center position, but more importantly and as importantly, everybody that tells me within the Wild organization said he has caught up to the hockey acumen of Zuccarello on one side and Kaprizov on the other side. And by that, I mean knowing where they're going to be, them knowing where he's going to be, facilitating, dishing, passing, scoring. And Sammy Steele has galvanized that first line, and that first line will remain just that for as long as that continues to happen.
Yep. And the other lines have been looking good too. I mean, we talked about the Grief line briefly, and also the Hartman line, and then that 4th line. Is there anything you want to add on the other 2, 3, 4 lines and what we're going to see going forward?
Well, that 4th line for sure, like with with Dewar and Shaw and Reeves, the energy that brings, we've talked about him every week here on Hot Dish. Just besides his sheer presence and physicality, he's an energy guy both on and off the ice. He's a guy who's not going to have Marcus Foligno feeling compelled to absolutely drop the gloves anytime, anywhere. He's the negating factor. I mean, if I had a dime for every time somebody within the Wild told me you have no idea the luxury you have, that nobody's going to mess with any of your top guns or your middle guns because they know 76. I got his number wrong last time. I think it's
70s. I think he's 75.
That's 75. That's because it's not a dad burn hockey number, but 75. Right. If 75 is on the bench, you're good to go. And he's a guy who's continues to bring energy and continues to do what he does best. And we talked about when Duhaime comes back, who is that expendable guy? And, Reeves probably is not at the age where he's going to play every night either. If you're in a physical situation and you're going up against a big physical team nightly, then you're probably going to see number 75. But if you can dance with Duhaime and you can dance with Shaw, and a little more speed and into the lineup there, you're going to be just fine.
Yep. And let me, we talked a lot about culture earlier, and let me ask you, as a hockey guy, if they're asking, let's say, Shaw to go down or Reeves to be a scratch one night, a healthy scratch or anything like that, is that anything that you think impacts the culture, or does this team kind of seem like a team where, something like that happens and they're like, hey, whatever's best for the team, I'm in it? What have you felt?
I think that's pretty much standard operating procedure at the professional hockey, at the National Hockey League level. I think these players expect that. I don't think anybody's pouting.
That's good.
The difficult situations are going to be, scratching somebody who's contributing. And, I don't think that happens very much in sports, let alone hockey. But I think there's a professional attitude there. And let's face it, 84 games is a long hockey season. I don't care if you're 21 years old or 35 years old. Nights off are good. Sometimes rest, and It's a long, long grind. So I don't anticipate any culture problems as a result from, changing a few names around and who's going to be playing where and who's going to be playing who.
That's good. Yeah. And they've obviously been shifting the team a lot already lately, and bringing in Reeves, the team was very accepting of it. So that's good to hear, and it's good to see. What I've noticed watching the games is, and we've talked about it before, it feels like any game you watch, or if you watch the next game, anybody watching this, just watch how sloppy they're making the other teams look. It makes their passes are going all over the place. The puck's bouncing around in the neutral zone. They're just making the other teams not look as good as they probably are as professionals, and they're slowing our own game down. Whenever we have the puck, it almost felt like, I don't know if you watched the World Cup, Gis, at all, but it felt like we're playing a lot like that, where Argentina was really just taking the ball, we're taking the puck and just passing it back to our D, setting up in the zone, passing all the way back behind the net, resetting up. It really feels like we're slowing the game down to keep it in our control. Would you agree?
100%. Just don't ask me too much about soccer or football or whatever the hell they call it these days, because I'm not really that guy. But I know a good system. I know a good system when I see it, Cole, in just about any sport.
Right.
And I think what you're talking about, and very astute of you to notice that, is remember how we've talked here in the last month or two about getting back to, wild hockey and systematic hockey, and, being in the right place at the right time to not only attack but defend is a sign of a good system. And when that happens, exactly what you just spoke of happens. Other teams look a little silly. Other teams' systems are breaking down. And the Wild's commitment to their system right now, this is also a team, remember, I sound like a broken record, but this was a team that through the first 15, 20 games of their season was allowing 20 quality scoring chances per hockey game on a 5-on-5 situation. What the Wild are most proud about right now in the last 14, 15 games is that they are under 10 quality scoring chances allowed per game. And in the last 5 games alone, Cole, they've given up 1 goal per piece against. So you've got opponents averaging under 10 quality scoring chances on 5-on-5 and 1 goal a game in the last 5 games. And that's when your systems are hitting on all cylinders. And systems is what this coaching staff preaches. The more their team buys into it, the more you're seeing what's happening and what we're talking about.
Yeah. It really feels like Wild hockey more than ever right now, especially the first line, but really all of the lines are running plays more than ever and not just trying to find openings and pass the puck around. It feels like they're actually passing the puck around with anticipation of setting up something, trying to open up a certain gap. They're just waiting for that opportunity and they're trying to find it. And man, their passing game, if you watch some of the highlights of any of the goals or even just watching the games in general or they're close, anytime they get close to scoring a goal, it's a lot of one-timers. I wish I had the number of how many one-time goals they've been having lately, but they'll just go in the zone and just cycle the puck, not just down in the corner, but also in the top of the zone. They're cycling the puck, they're dropping it back, they're handing it off, they're dropping it back. They're not making some long, crazy passes. They're just waiting for one of those defenders, especially in the Red Wings game, I remember. They were waiting for one of those defenders just to take one step too far out of position, and then they make that pass across the middle of the zone to Kaprizov or from Kaprizov to Zuccarello, doesn't matter. And they're putting it tape to tape and tapping it in and just not tapping it in, they're ripping it in, but still they're making passes slowly by opening up gaps and they're not rushing things. They're keeping it, they're holding the puck. It's really good to see. And it feels like, from a hockey IQ standpoint, they've really got it figured out.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think your assessment is bang on. I think what you're referring to is being intentional, being methodical. Yeah. It's frustrating sometimes to fans if the clubs are losing or clubs are not getting quality scoring chances or shots on goal at the end of the game are even, subpar to fan expectation. But I can tell you, being around this game at a pretty high level, covering it in the media for a few decades now, that frustration is heard by the players. And sometimes a coach will say, hey, let's score a greasy one, or let's just get some shots on the net and see what happens. But in today's National Hockey League, when you have 6'7", 6'8" goaltenders, when you have goalie pads that do not show 1 ounce of open net, when you got defensemen who are willing to lay down in front of slap shots and take shots to the face and to the knees and other private parts that aren't so fun some nights, you do really have to do what you just described, Obi, and move the puck around. Make your bid when the time is right. Look for that very slight breakdown in a D zone when your opponent makes that breakdown, and that's when you see hockey played on its highest level. Frustrating to watch sometimes because it's pretty to watch when the teams are going dot to dot, point to point, offside, weak side, strong side, da-da-da, but not shooting the puck. What they're waiting for is exactly what you spoke of, and that's a breakdown of some sort at some point, and then they exploit it, and then the red light goes on, and then they all go line up each other at center ice to take another face-off after a great, great goal, and usually a pretty goal to watch.
Yep, for sure. It's clearly been puck control advantage Wild, it feels like, in all of these games lately, which is
no
good to see.
doubt about it. One thing that's also helping that, and your comment reminded me that, is just activating the defenseman. We saw goals from Spurgeon recently. We've seen goal from Matt Dumba again, and the defensive point production is just starting to creep in there enough to take a little bit of some of that buzz off the, waiting for the Picassos to paint the pictures up front. If we can get products and we can get points from the back end, it all plays into that front end. And, let's face it, what you just talked about also is, if you look at 3 forwards or a winger and a center on the ice that some of us old school guys still refer to him as, if you look at activating defensemen now and having a defenseman like Spurgeon and Dumba, Brodin to a degree sometimes, Kalen Addison, who we had not even talked about here. They finally got him on the same page now to be defensively committed, but Kalen Addison can bring all kinds of offense. So if Addison, Spurgeon, and Brodin are contributing and becoming almost, that fourth forward on the ice and getting involved and engaged offensively, you'll also see good things happening for the Wild. And now I'm really excited about that trend that the defensemen are activating and actually, scoring some goals now, and that's only going to behoove the green team down the stretch here.
Speaking of defensemen, anytime we get any kind of comments on Twitter or YouTube, anywhere that you want to leave a comment, we take that seriously. We want to make sure we get that question answered, and we have a question about the defense from Mason. He actually asked, first of all, he said, is Steele staying with the top line? I think we answered that. Yes, he's staying there. Why change something that's not broken? But then he said, and lastly, if Dumba continues to play well, will there still be trade talks about trading him? And are there any other trade rumors you've been hearing the Wild could make?
Great question from Mason, and thanks for reaching out, Mason, and also encourage everybody else to. I'm not going to pretend I'm going to reach into a crystal ball here, but obviously, with or without Matt Dumba picking up his game, and there are trends right now that he is. He's playing better defensively. He scored a goal the other night. He's an igniter type guy. One goal could lead to 10 for him in January. He's that kind of player. What Matt Dumba is not going to evade is how much money the Minnesota Wild play him. And I think it's $6-7 million a year as a defenseman, and his contract is up, and he can sign with just about anybody he wants to. And whether or not the Wild are willing to invest in his future, or whether or not he's going to garner the big dollars, remains to be seen. But he continues to lead the hot stove leagues in terms of players who could not belong to Minnesota. And you know how much I hate talking about players' livelihoods, but he could be purely a victim of capology and financing here. Brock Faber, obviously, I think the Wild, and I'm continuing to hear that they're ready and rocking and roll to have him right into St. Paul whenever the Minnesota Golden Gopher season ends. Obviously, he's a player they're very high on. That would precipitate a trade like Dumba happening, sooner than later, although the Gophers aren't going to be done with their season anytime soon. Other players that they're going to possibly be needing are going to be very dependent on what their needs are come February and March and into April. But it's the same old thing. Time will tell. Needs will reveal themselves. Directions will reveal themselves. Player performance is either really, really good or really, really bad will dictate a lot of that. What's going to happen if Marco Rossi scores 15 goals in 15 games in the American Hockey League? What if Sammy Walker continues to light it up? These are the what-ifs that are good problems, but also the what-ifs that any general manager is not only glad to have, but maybe makes them lose a little sleep at night thinking about where everybody ultimately fits. The other news this week in the National Hockey League is they are going to expand their salary cap by $1 million next year. And while $1 million doesn't seem a lot, what it kind of transposes, as I understand it, and I'm no numbers guy, as you well know, Obi.
Yeah, we're not on the salary cap.
When the Suter and Parisi penalty, financial penalty expires here, there might be $15 million for Minnesota to play around with as soon as next year here on the free agent market. So those are bits and pieces. That's the long term. The short term is going to be based, as it always is, on player performances, financials, and what do I need to do what I think I can as a Wild and a playoff contender and somebody wants to go deep, or do we sit back and not hit the accelerator on that figure, and that by March we're not in a playoff picture, and then you could do a lot then. I mean, that's when we see wholesale changes in some terms. So great question, Mason. I think I rambled on it, and if you haven't fallen asleep right now with my answer, thanks for checking in.
No, and let me just kind of, to follow up with that too, I'd say we've talked on the podcast about they needed to be at a certain place by Christmas. I think they've gotten to that place. Obviously, we're not totally there yet, but it feels like if we would have been out of it by now, Dumba might have already been packing his bags because of the salary cap. Clearly, that's not happening anytime soon, so that's good news. So I would say yes, in a way. We're not getting rid of Dumba any minute like it could have been, so time will tell. We'll see what happens. And also, talking about just time will tell, last thing, we mentioned very briefly kind of where we sit in the division, in the Central Division, and we've got an upcoming schedule against, the Ducks, the Sharks, and the Jets, I believe.
That's exactly right.
Where do you feel like when things kind of shake out at the end of that road trip, where we might sit, or also shake out at the end of the year in the Central Division? Do you expect us to be number one, or are we trying to get in to the playoffs by not necessarily being the number one team in the division?
There's two ways to look at it. I mean, you can set lofty goals, and if numbers are important, I did talk to somebody within Hockey Ops this week with Minnesota that they've kind of tempered a little bit of their quarterly expectations and gone a little bit more game to game. And by that, I mean they're going to look at last night's game today and think about how last night's game can impact the next game, which in this case happens to be Anaheim. After Anaheim on Wednesday night, they'll look at what happens.
Sharks. I think it's the Sharks next on Wednesday night at like 9:30. Right. It's super late.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm being verbose again. Game to game, Analyze what you need for the next one, and go from there. And if you think about that, the quarterly expectation, or a Christmas list of sorts on where we would love to be at Christmas or where we would love to be at January and February, I think you read and react to personnel and what you're dealing with, and this seems to be a day-to-day team versus kind of a quarterly financial report team in terms of wins and losses. So I think while I could predict where they would want to be, obviously they want to be in the playoffs, and obviously they'd love to have a high enough seed to have home ice and obviously play better on home ice and dominate on home ice. I can tell you without any of the variables that I've spelled out here that this is a coaching staff that is not going to be, this is a front office that is not going to be, this is a fan base that is not going to be thrilled by just making the playoffs and maybe making a first-round exit. Like they have for a few years now, a few too many years, to all of those parties that are concerned about it.
Yep, I agree. There's definitely been some years where you're just happy with the team making the playoffs, doing the best they can, but this feels like not one of those years. We either want all in or all out, and that's where I think a lot of the fans are sitting. So hopefully they're all in, and we continue to be all in. Right now, we're getting lots of great gifts from watching Kaprizov play hockey, Matt Boldy play hockey. There's a lot of guys that are really fun to watch, and Kaprizov obviously as an elf, and Reeves as Santa. It doesn't get much better than that. So we look forward to seeing what happens over the next few games here, and we'll make sure we have another podcast coming up. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on the notifications, and you find out right whenever we're going to be posting a new episode, and follow us on Twitter too. It's really fun. We've been tweeting during the games, so give us a follow there. Give us your feedback during the game. We'll be very responsive with you. It's a good time. So follow us at Hot Dish Sports, and go Wild.